Yep.
Hey,
Welcome. Welcome to Up Close. He's the poet behind the verse. This is um, our winter program. I'm right now trying to do something I should have done before. Put this on speaker. There we go. And I am your host, River Maria Erke, and here with me is Julie Martin.
hello.
Uh, what we do here is showcase one poet a season, and with an interview, a poetry reading, and today we have Frank. Frankie, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Gioia.
Gioia. I was not sure because it's spelled a little different. Gioia.
It's a funky spelling. It's a Sicilian spelling, so
It is a little different. Gioia.
correct.
Gioia.
Got it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so um, I'd like to remind our audience to remain muted during the duration of the show, and we're a shout out to our sponsors, Cracked Walnut and the League of Minnesota Poets, and I would remind us all we're being recorded for a future video on YouTube. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Frank Gioia. I say it right?
You did.
Okay. Also known as Frankie, who was born in 1942 and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He's the oldest of three boys, and he grew up around his Italian mother's family in the neighborhood in Brooklyn. And as Frankie says, he was raised in a fractured family. We'll learn about that later. A carpenter, writer, poet, veteran, proud grandpa of four, doubly proud great grandpa of two young ones. Frank dabbles in charcoal drawing, and I hear he's a fabulous Italian cook too. He published his first book last October, Mercury Man, Remembering Brooklyn, a memoir of short stories. With that, let's welcome Frankie Gioia. Goya. I almost messed that one up there. Hello.
Hello. It's just great to be here. I love the tech. You guys are there and I'm here. It's wonderful. Nice to see you.
And with that, you are coming from California. Where are you exactly?
I'm in El Dorado, which is about 100 miles east of Berkeley, where I was yesterday.
Okay.
So
100
we have
miles
that.
east?
Yes. We're in the Sierra foothills, kind of on the road to Lake Tahoe.
Ooh, you're in a good spot. And was the temperature today?
Today was sunny, 55.
Oh, that's nice.
It gets chilly at night. There's definitely a winter, but it's not anything you would, be aware of. I mean, it gets cold, but not real cold, and it rarely snows, if at all.
Well, your wife Susie and you have right now have some living arrangements that I personally think is like the ideal setup for parents. And you're right now in California, but I met you in Minnesota. Can you tell us what this arrangement is?
Sure. We have a condominium in St. Louis Park on Wolf Lake, and we are permanent residents there. Spend more than half the year there. We have some family in Edina, couple of grandkids, and we come here for the winter. I live on a property that my son has. We have a small separate home on that property, and we have some grandchildren, great grandchildren, also on the property. So it's really family oriented, and it's kind of like a family compound.
You mentioned that you have a rule that you don't talk about politics and stuff with your children and grandchildren. Why is that?
I think, we think about things differently. Here in California, where we're located, it's a very libertarian area. And I find that to argue politics is futile most of the time. And I'm not interested really in arguing with my family. I'm just interested in being with them, loving them, kissing them, and having them around.
Do you think that that's kind of connected to, like, if we flash back to your childhood right now, and at the age of 11, your dad was pretty much an ass, and he ran off with your brother's wife and kind of fractured your family? Do you think that that's partially why you don't think about say anything, or is it just?
I could say a lot about my father, for sure. And he what he did to his brother and what he did to my mother,
Yeah.
and what he did to myself and my kid brothers, just no loyalty, no sense of right and wrong, only what was important to him, only to feed what he needed.
Yeah.
So, whether that kind of filters into what goes on in my life now, 70 years later from then, is really up for grabs. I'm not really sure.
That's true.
That's
true.
Basically, I just use it now to feed my creative interest.
That makes sense.
It's what I write about. It's what I read about.
Well, to change the feeling a little bit, what would be your fondest childhood memory?
I would say that before my father left, I was very involved with him as a young boy. And I would say one of the things I actually remember is him taking me to a bar and sitting me up on that bar and handing me a Coke. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And, I was a hit.
You were there alone with him?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
So those kinds of experiences are really amongst the best.
Totally. Those warm moments. Well, you grew up in Brooklyn, basically growing up in the 50s,
That's
Brooklyn.
correct. That's right.
And you had a little run-in with some drugs, and
I did.
and it's a gang. So what age did you do drugs for the first time?
I was 15.
Okay. And then joined a gang?
I joined the gang earlier. I joined the gang when I was about 12 and a half.
They become kind of a family, though.
I'm sorry.
they became like family.
Absolutely. What I refer to, my guys, um, we together collectively, there were probably a dozen of us, joined a larger gang called the Halsey Bops. And I personally was involved with that gang for 3 or 4 years until such time as I became 16. And at 16, at least in the state of New York then, if you hurt somebody, you could go to jail. And I had an older cousin who kind of watched out for me. And he let me know that the gang was no longer a good idea. And that I should be, doing something better with my time. I had started to hang out in a pool room. I loved the pool room. I loved the action. And I met some folks who were using drugs, and that's how I kind of got into drugs on my own.
Gotcha. Well, you have a poem about the neighborhood.
I do. I have a poem called My Guys. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
My Guys. The rumble is set for dark. Our gang, Halsey Bops. Theirs, Chaplin's. Everything in, zip guns included. Shoots 22s, easy to make. Car antenna, a nail, a rubber band. Spend the days talking tough, sharpening weapons, making gasoline bombs. Greet their arrival with 6 packs of fire raining through the night sky, running after them with baseball bats. Red lights flash against the darkness, New York's finest on the scene. Our white and black faces stare at the crimson brick wall. The men in blue, objects of our mutual scorn. Camaraderie develops in a paddy wagon. Released with a warning, we return to the park. Share bottles of cheap wine. Spend the night telling ego-driven stories designed to prove who has the biggest cock.
Oh, well, that was quite that was very fitting. I didn't know how you were going to use that that worked. So and then 63 you entered was you and a couple friends that entered the army, or was it just you?
No, it was myself and a couple of friends.
Okay.
It was 63. I had been using drugs for about 5 years. Things started to get really dicey. And a couple of my friends convinced me that we really needed to get out of the neighborhood. We really needed to change the arc of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we joined the army together. One of those guys is still a friend of mine. One of the other fellow, the third guy, was killed in the army in a car accident.
Oh.
So, but it broke the pattern. The army did. You couldn't go to the corner and just kind of score, some narcotics. In Vietnam, you could actually go to the corner and score narcotics. So I spent 11 and a half months there, and I kind of fell back into drug use there. But when I got home, I, kind of cleaned things up a little bit and um, started to live like a normal person.
Totally, and that's when you met your woman that became your first wife
Carol,
in '67, the one you had your
that's
son with.
that's
Uh,
correct.
and
That's
you moved
correct.
to New York State with her. You guys divorced it when he was 2.5, and I think it's so cool. You met the woman you're with today, Susie, when your son was 5 and her son was 5. That's so
It,
cute.
it's true, and it made it like all of a sudden we had this little bit of a nuclear family or a reconstituted family. Um, but it gave each of the kids, another person to relate to a little bit,
Oh,
uh,
totally.
as opposed to this strange man or this strange woman. Who are these people?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, they fought for a while, um, but at some point they seem to have worked it out, and now they're in their early 50s and they're actually, kind of like middle-aged people.
Mm-hmm. Um, that's cool. And then I thought it was neat that you say from the age of 27 to 50, that every 7 years you had a different job.
It's true. It's
And what
true.
what are some of these jobs?
So I guess I would get bored. Um, so I moved to the country, as I refer to it, at 27. I had been an administrator in an office in New York. So I had to figure out a way to earn a living. So I became a carpenter. Um, and I did that for about 7 years. And at a certain point, I realized that I really couldn't do that as I got older. It was very hard work. So I opened a retail shop, and someone helped me, and I became a leather crafter. I taught myself how to work with leather, and I
Cool.
did that. And that was kind of a good business. I did that for 7 years or maybe 8. And I sold that. And just around that time, I bought this big old Victorian mansion, um, and decided to turn it into, or at least part of it, into a bed and breakfast. And
And that's
I,
in Massachusetts, right? So you
in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in the Berkshire Mountains, which is a big tourist area, the summer home of the Berkshire Symphony Orchestra, um, Jacob's Pillow Dance Company, Berkshire Theater Festival. Is really a real collection of
lots of artists.
arts and culture. So I just kind of would bounce from place to place, and then at some point um, after running the B&B for 7 years or so, I decided I was almost 50. I guess I was 49 or something. And I got a job, and I kind of put all of those different skills together. And I worked for a nonprofit housing agency until I was ready to retire.
Okay. Well, and then you guys lived there for 20 years.
That's right, we did.
But after 55 years, you decided to step back on stage again. How did that come to be?
I had been laughed off stage as a 10-year-old, and when I retired at 65, I ran into a guy who was a little bit younger than me, um, and he was giving acting classes, and he encouraged me to take his class. And I asked him if he would kind of watch out for me, protect me a little bit, if I was going to put myself out there. And he said he would, and he did. Um, so I took his class for, I don't know, year and a half. And during that period, we performed at an open mic as a group. Um, and I loved being on the stage. Um, and although initially I was very nervous and anxious about it, I still wanted to do it. And I did. And so 15 years later, and I'm still going up on stage and reading my stories.
How did this all bring the writer out of you?
Um, at some point, I'm going to say, I was about 45. And some friends, as a way of uh, finding something to do, we talk about cabin fever, those of us that live through real winters. And at some point, they came up with this idea. We should just spend the night, eat, drink, and read stories to each other, just entertain each other. And so it began. We did it, but I had never written anything, so I wrote, just read from a book that I found that I thought might be interesting. And my wife Susie, who's a writer, she wrote something, and most of the people who attended wrote something, and that went on for 2 or 3 years. And then I thought, gee, I should try. I mean, I can write something. It can't be that difficult. So I wrote a story about Vietnam, and I got some feedback that was very encouraging. And I just kind of started to write short stories about,
Cool.
my Italian heritage, my guys on the street, my drug use, the army, etc.
And then it just eventually developed, you started writing poems?
Recently, when I came to California last year, I was very fortunate. I became friendly with a woman who at the time was the poet laureate of El Dorado County. And she introduced me to some people who were interested in the spoken word and in poetry and attended open mics and so on. And I started to do that. And she encouraged me to try to write poetry. So I did. And when I went back to Minnesota, I went to a poetry workshop at the I can't remember the name of the library in St. Paul.
Oh, it starts with an H.
That it's
Island.
now run by Barry McDonald,
Yep.
previously run
Donna.
by Donna Isaacs. And so, and they gave me nice feedback. My stuff is really a little bit different. It's a memoir poem. That's what I write about. I just write about my, that a 15-year period from the time I was maybe 8 years old until the time I get out of the army at 23. So those are my stories.
But you also wrote a play.
I did. I wrote a play called 14 Holy Martyrs, which goes into a little bit more depth, but again, it's about my gang, it's about our drug use, it's about some funny stuff that happened along the way. It's about my mom, and we did a stage reading of it in Great Barrington in 2016. And in fact, one of my stories was recently accepted by a group of folks here in Sacramento. Sacramento is about 45-minute drive from where I am. These folks have an organization called Stories on Stage Sacramento. And they accepted one of my pieces, and they have engaged a guy who's the creative director for the Sacramento Dance Company. And he's going to be reading my piece next month in February.
Oh, cool.
So I think it'll be choreographed. I think it'll be maybe the dance involved with it, so I'm very excited about it.
Which poem is it?
It's a poem called Craps. It's a poem about shooting dice on the street.
Okay.
And that's what I said. I had my publisher send them my book to review, and that was the piece that they selected.
That's cool. You don't have it on you.
I have it in my book.
Do you want to read it to us?
I can, if you think you would like to hear it.
I would.
To read it for you. So this is called Craps. He threw down a few crumpled bills near the brick wall. Someone standing in the crowd said, "You're covered, man. Go ahead. Roll them." The shooter blew into his fist, shook his right hand, closed his eyes, and said to himself, as if in prayer, "Help me, Jesus. Bless me, Mary and Joseph. Show me a 7, baby. 7. Then this other guy said, "Throw the fucking bones already, will you? Snake eyes, baby. Snake eyes." I listened as the sounds from the dice game drifted over to the wooden benches. The lingo of craps was familiar to me. I had watched Lefty and his friends play outside Sal's pool hall on Madison. You only needed a wall. A garage door would do. And a few guys feeling lucky, a little money in their pockets. I hadn't played before, not for real money. This was for dollars, not some loose change. Up until then, my experience with dice had been playing Monopoly, but I was itching to give it a try. The worst I could do was lose a few bucks. I had to know when to lay your money down, when not. Bet strategic. It was all about the shooter. He controlled the dice and the betting. Sure, luck was part of it, but skill entered into it too. Was the shooter hot or cold? What point did he need to hit to win? You had a better chance of throwing a 6 or an 8 than the odds of hitting an outside number like a 4 or a 5 or a 9 or 10. We were hanging outside the garages near the pool room, around the corner from Jimmy's apartment on Central. It was where he kept his '56 Lincoln, shiny black with suicide doors. I was hanging back watching the action. The shooter was hot, had thrown a natural on 2 of his first 3 rolls, had hit a tough point, Little Joe, a 4 in between. Throw a 7 or 11, a natural on the initial roll, and you're a winner. Throw a 7 after the point has been established, and you lose. The point is the number you have to match if you don't throw a natural on the first roll. Now the shooter had a fistful of dollars in his left hand, the cubes in his right. He laid down a 10 spot, and a couple of guys took 5 each to cover. Little Louie bet a pound on a fade and started yelling, "Come on, mama, boxcars, craps for daddy." A fade is a side bet, either for or against the shooter. The guy said, 7-11, baby, 7-11, and let the dice fly. Boxcars, motherfucker, boxcars. The sounds of the players told you all you needed to know. The shooter started cursing because he had let the winning bets ride, played double or nothing. So when he rolled craps, he lost everything. Craps is either a 2, snake eyes, a 3, or a 12, boxcars on the first roll. Throw any of those before the point is set, and you lose. Throw it after, and it doesn't mean shit. One of the older guys said, "Who's up?" If I wanted in, it was my roll. I picked up the dice and felt my belly tighten. I threw down a deuce, and somebody snickered and said, "I've got the heavy hitter." "You're covered, big guy. Roll 'em." I shook my right hand and heard myself say, "Let her rip. Come on, 7." And I let them fly. They came up 11, and I was up $2. "Let it ride," I said, and I could feel myself start to relax. The shooter controls the ivories for as long as he keeps winning. "Baby needs a new pair of shoes," I shouted, and won again with a 7. Fuck this shit. First the natural, now the devil, the guy who covered my bets said, the tone of his voice betraying how pissed off he was. Now I'm up $6, and I didn't know what the bones could still give me. So I said, "Take it down," and picked up half the 8 singles laying on the ground. I rolled the dice and threw craps, a 3, and Louie started yelling, "AC Deucey, mama, AC Deucey, my roll." Jimmy shouted down from the kitchen window, "Hey, Frankie, want to go for a ride?" "Sure," I said. "I'm up a deuce, man. I'll buy you an ice cream."
So that's what that guy's gonna read. What does it
That's
get
pretty cool.
broadcasted on?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm just going to go and watch.
Cool. Well, in 21, you decided, or you the year before, but you started gathering your short stories that you had been writing over the years to make a book, and you got 36 of them together, and they're mostly, like you said, they're about those years from when you're younger to right after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And you called it The Mercury Man, Remembering Brooklyn. What's the story behind the title? Do you have a copy that we can see too? Okay.
So the cover contains a photograph of a 1954 blue Mercury. My father purchased this is my father's car on the cover.
Okay.
And there is a title story called The Mercury Man. When my father left the family, my mother no longer referred to him by either his name or your father. She called him the Mercury Man.
Oh, she did? Oh.
So that, and the entire family knew that. I mean, it was known. My mother was very angry. She was devastated. And, she really, he destroyed her life.
Yeah.
She never got over it.
Oh.
And she gave him that name, and I have a story called The Mercury Man in the book. And I decided to use the title.
Gotcha. That's a great story. Well, you said that you would read us. Do you know which one you want to read? We get to hear one
Well,
story.
I'm going to take a sip of water here, since I'm
Totally.
fighting a cold. But I can read you the title story.
Oh, the actual title story. Okay,
All right?
that works.
Okay. This is called The Mercury Man. We were playing stickball, dodging the cars and buses as usual, just down the block from my house. My father wasn't working, so it must have been a Saturday. Until then, the only car I had ever seen him drive was our '49 Buick. That day, he drove down Schaefer in a new 1954 blue Mercury, just out of the showroom. The chrome bullets on the front bumper shimmered in the afternoon light, like the car was alive. Parked it in front of our house. When he opened the driver's side door, the smirk on his face told the whole story. That I just know I'm going to get that piece of ass look spread across his face. Naturally, I thought the car was ours, mine. Didn't know my father had other plans. That even though the car was new, he was closing an old chapter in his life, our lives. In a few months, he would point the car east toward Long Island, toward Aunt Betty's. Never looked back. He lived there the rest of his life. Probably one of the reasons I never did. My mother, who loved the Buick, didn't like the Mercury. Was pissed that my father spent over $2,000 on a car without talking to her about it. Maybe she saw the bigger picture. What I see when I close my eyes is them fighting in the hall. It's too painful to watch, and my eyes stay glued to the shit round fake wainscoting. I stare at it so I don't have to look at them. I can still hear them yelling. I can't shut them out. My mother saying, "You're a good-for-nothing bum. Do you hear me? You're a putana, Jerry. A whore. I should have listened to my papa. Never married you." She holds on to the car's keys, swings her arms wildly while blocking the frosted glass door to the outside. My father raises his hands to defend himself as her punches rain down on him. I worry that the glass will break and she will get hurt. I beg them, please, please don't fight. But they're not listening. I can still see the look on his face, that he had found himself in this situation, calling her a crazy bitch, just wanting to get out of the house as quickly as possible, to leave this mess he had created in the rearview mirror. Never, ever use his name in this house again. My mother screamed it at us, said it over and over whenever she needed to vent her anger, feel her pain. She called my father the Mercury Man. It became his new name, beginning on the day he left us. She never referred to him as your father again, never acknowledged his existence, although she kept his last name. Maybe it was her way of holding on to the past, not having to embrace this new reality. But why? This is the same man who's running around, tortured her. She cried over the lipstick on his collar, kept his cum-stained pants hanging in the closet. His new life absorbed her every waking moment. She was devastated that he had left her with 3 children, hated him for what he had done. Sometimes, when we upset her, she took it out on us, crying and chasing me and my brothers around the house, desperately swinging a handful of leather belts, stopping only when her sobbing made it impossible to continue. My father became the Mercury Man, and I became the man of the house. Not yet 12, and being told I was a man, that I was now responsible for taking care of my mother, my younger brothers. This was new territory, something my aunts and uncles dreamed up, some of the same relatives I would never see again because of my parents' divorce. People took sides. The family was broken. Compound fractures, they never healed. At school, the church pastor sought me out to talk about the family's problems, tried to convince me to join God's team, become a priest. It was a lot to think about. First off, I would need to learn Latin, take my Catholicism much more seriously, go to church on Sundays, never have sex. Really? Never have sex? I was just learning the rules of the game. Now he wanted me to play for another team. Fuck that. And before I think about switching sides, I at least want a chance to give it a try.
Wow. That's a pretty tense story.
It is. It is. I feel it when I read it.
Does it feel like it's you made closure, you shed it off somewhat by telling it?
Um, I find that all the writing, all the reading, the work I've done over the years has all contributed to lessening the pain.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, last October is when I met you. You found a literary world in Minnesota. How did
I
this happen?
I still, I feel very fortunate. I had started to write poetry. I was attending the monthly workshops that Donna was running.
Mhm.
I met Barry and I met a couple of other folks. And so now my name was in the group emails that went out. And Bill Anderson sent out an email that invited folks to do a poetry read around.
Mhm.
And there were only 8 of us there. You were there. Barry was there. A couple of other folks. And we just sat around for a couple of hours and read our stuff to each other. And I was just so pleased to be able to be reading out loud, which I love to do, and to have met a group of like-minded people,
Mhm.
people who were interested in poetry, spoken word, performance, and it just all happened from there. That you know, then
That's cool.
I met Stanley, and he asked me to read my stuff at one of his events, and you asked me to do this
Yeah.
today, and it just keeps rolling along.
Well, and
You know,
now it's happening in California.
yes, it is.
You're having
Yes,
stuff
it is.
happen, and then soon you're gonna have, you're gonna be featured. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. In fact, I think it was the day after I got here, or maybe it's the week after I got here, just a few weeks ago, before I even left Minnesota, someone was doing a story, what they refer to as storytelling Sundays.
Mhm.
And they called me from California and said, we need one more feature, and you have been recommended to me, and I hope that you've got 10 minutes. You can read 2 stories. And I said, I'm there.
Cool.
So I've done that, and the open mics continue, and I have a feature in February in Sacramento, and I have one here in March, and so it's very exciting.
It is. It's. It is. It's. Wow. And when will you come back to Minnesota?
In the spring. I haven't
Oh, okay.
decided on a date yet, but sometime in the spring.
Well, cool. Well, I think that's all for our interview today. That went very smoothly.
Good. I
And
I thought it was wonderful. I really appreciate you guys, your efforts to make
totally,
these things happen.
totally. Thank you so much. Um, Now actually I'm gonna shift over to Julie. Where are you, dear?
Hello. I have a
Hello.
couple. Should I make a couple announcements?
Yes, please.
Okay. Upcoming announcements about what's happening with Up Close. April 4th, we will be back featuring Catherine Stenzel. And then summer will be the next Up Close after that April feature, featuring Lauren Nemi. June 27th is kind of a strange date. We picked it because otherwise it was landing on the 4th of July. Just a no-go.
Yeah, I don't know though.
It was
Cool.
very fun to meet you, Frank, and to hear your work.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Same. And I hope to see you in Minnesota.